If I could have your attention, I appreciate it. Just still grab your snacks, no problem. You guys can listen at the same time. As Rabbi Dan mentioned, my name is Shane Foxman. I'm thrilled to be here, but I'm more excited that you're here. And let's be honest, you all heard Rabbi Dan. He doesn't really need me here anyway. Rabbi Dan could have done this all by himself. And we, look, Temple's really open to visitors. You want to drop in on a Saturday, he does 2 shows. I am glad you're here. As I mentioned to my table, I am a member here. I'm not a religious person. I do take my religion seriously, especially in the times we're living in right now. But to have you here, this is a place, I moved here 20 years ago. I got married here. My daughter had her bat mitzvah here. I mourn the passing of my parents here. And there is something about this place, but synagogues in general, this one because I'm here, there's something special about the place. So I'm really glad you have decided to come tonight. So I hope you've enjoyed listening to Rabbi Dan, and I'm sure you'll hear some more interesting stuff now. I want to ask Archbishop Michael first something, and I'll go off script because I want to find out, you know, when
you got a script?
When you're a kid,
okay.
You know, did you want to be a fireman? Do you want to be an archbishop? You know, what do you want to be when you grow up?
I want to be the Pope.
But let me ask you this. What does the title Archbishop mean? For those of us that aren't, like, I know what a priest is.
Okay.
What's an archbishop?
An archbishop is, you know, the whole world for Catholics is divided into what we call dioceses. They're territorial, you know, entities. For here, the Lower Mainland, there's one, you know, Kelowna, Prince George. And the head of that is a bishop. And then of a larger territory, say like a British Columbia, like for Vancouver, there's someone who's an archbishop. Doesn't really have any control over the others. It's a little bit of an honorific. So in the world, like there's an archbishop in Edmonton, there's one in Montreal, one in Toronto, you know, that kind of stuff.
You're a chess piece of the Pope.
There you go.
So,
is there a rook or a knight?
Yeah.
So you know what? That's an interesting title, and it sounds like, well, you might have not a lot of power necessarily. You seem well connected. So before we get into anything else, I know Rabbi Dan can't do this for me, but can you get me Taylor Swift tickets? My daughter is, you know.
Right. No.
No. Okay. That's everybody's answer. No. Let me ask you seriously, though.
Okay.
As a kid growing up, like, did you want to be, again, I'm not joking, a fireman, a police, like, what was it? When is your moment that you go?
When I was a kid, I wanted to be either a lawyer, an architect, or I wanted to teach. Those were things that I held, and I ended up kind of on the teaching wing. But that was something that I wanted to do, and I used architecture interested me. I used to like drawings and buy architectural digests when I was a kid. And being a lawyer. Never wanted to be a doctor.
You would never would have fit in here, exactly.
Exactly. No, my mother didn't think that.
But going from architect to, and forgive if I don't use the right term, the seminary, say for example, that's a huge, decision.
I mean, I was a kid in a home that was mixed. My mother was not Catholic; she was Protestant, and remained so all her life. But I went to Catholic school. I ended up going to a secondary school, a high school that was run by the Basilian Fathers, who run St. Mike's and stuff in Toronto. And they had just established a school in Ottawa. And because they had this great junior A hockey team, my father was a great athlete. He said, "You're going to go to St. Joseph's." It was a new school. And so I went there. I was taught by the priests. And that's when I kind of really started to think that this is what I'd like to do. There was a terrific poster on one of the landings going up, and it said, there was a picture of it, kind of a young priest. He was pushing open a door, and it said something like, "Long hours, hard work, no pay, be a Basilian." And that appealed to a 16-year-old kid who had. But I didn't go to the seminary right away. I went to the University of Toronto for a bit, and then entered during my university years to the seminary, and then it's like 10, 12 years before ordination.
Long and hard decision, or did it seem like just an obvious thing to do?
This was the 60s, and it wasn't like when young guys who are becoming priests today, seminarians, they have these great stories of conversion and all of these things. In the 1960s, there were so many, it was not unusual for a Catholic guy to enter the seminary. A lot left, but it wasn't such a deal. Now it's a much bigger deal. There's far more testing. There's all of this stuff, but it wasn't then. It was a quite ordinary thing for a kid to do, and I did it.
Rabbi Dan,
You probably have a more interesting story.
give us a sense, at what point, did you want to be a ball player when you were a kid? Like, what was your...
So I do have a theory that at least most of my classmates all wanted to be some form of a professional athlete, usually baseball. Yeah, I wanted to be a third baseman for the San Francisco Giants.
Wow.
That didn't happen. Didn't even come close. I think at some point somebody said to me, you have a better chance of owning the team than you do playing on the team. And I didn't have any chance of owning the team either. But no, I grew up in a Jewish home. I like to say we were Jewish mutts. We were a little bit of everything. My dad was president of the Reform Temple and the Conservative Synagogue at the same time.
How does that work?
My mother was a Jewish educator. My grandparents were Jewish educators. My grandfather owned a liquor store, but was the bar mitzvah tutor this is in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I grew up in Jewish youth group, very involved in what was a sort of a pan-denominational or non-denominational Jewish youth group called the B'nai B'rith Youth Organization. So when baseball didn't work out, I thought I wanted to be a journalist for a while. In university, I was in politics briefly, working on campaigns and stuff. But it was really my Jewish summer camp experience and my youth group experience and wanting to sort of stay in that world, in that bubble, that led me to, it was a game of catch with a camp rabbi. It all comes back to baseball. He and I had never really had a conversation with a rabbi before, and as we were playing catch, you can talk. And I said, what does a rabbi do? And he listed all the things that a rabbi does. They teach, they preach, they serve in leadership roles, they manage organizations, they counsel people and console people. And it sounded like all the things I wanted to do. So it was really that conversation that led me to this work. And I went to my rabbi and I said, Rabbi, I don't really feel a calling from God to do this. He said, that's okay. That's often how it works with us. It's not a calling from God, but a calling from the community to be of service. And while I have a relationship with God, and I hope God has one with me, it's really about the community and being of service to the community that has been sort of my motivating force.
You mentioned so many connections with the Jewish community, with your parents and grandparents. Were they religious, though? Or were they were Jewish, but were they religious?
Yeah, not religious in the sense that when we usually think of, Orthodox Judaism or something like that. My grandfather grew up as an Orthodox Jew and rejected it when he came of age. No, they were San Francisco Reform Jews, which, if you know anything about the migration of Judaism from the Fiddler on the Roof era to the west coast of California, if you left the shtetl, you were often either running from the Cossacks or you were running from the rabbis, who almost exerted as much control over your life. And so you left that to get away from that, and you might go to New York. And in New York, there was a Jewish community, and there was still kosher food, and you were still sort of under the eye of organized Judaism. If you left New York and you went all the way to San Francisco, you were really running away from the Jewish community. And that was where my family had its roots since the mid-1800s. So I think they were one of the first people to run away.
Archbishop, were they religious? You said your mother was Protestant, your father was Catholic.
Well, we were...
Is that considered a mixed marriage, by the way?
It is. It's a mixed marriage.
Interesting. See,
that was the term. And when when they got married in 1939, which was just that they got married the day before Canada declared war in 39, the non-Catholic party signed that they would raise the children Catholic, and my mother kept her promise. She didn't.
Explain that, the Catholic party. Explain that to me.
That would be like my mother as a Protestant when she married my father, who was a Catholic. If they were going to get married in the church, the rule was the non-Catholic signed on the dotted, literally on the line, saying, I will raise the children Catholic. I will support my husband. So that the questions of how the kids will be raised was settled actually before marriage. It was forced in a way, but my mother she went to university in the 30s and at the University of Saskatchewan, and she had a priest, became a Monsignor, he ended up baptizing me, who taught philosophy, and so she wasn't anti-Catholic, she just didn't think Catholics were right. I, of course, tried to persuade her when I was 13 or 14, but I didn't succeed.
So was it, and again, I don't know the degrees of, like in Judaism, I know the degrees of how religious you are by what you do. Is there a difference, like how religious were they?
Sometimes say practicing and non-practicing.
Okay.
People go to church very regularly every Sunday, and those who don't. That's kind of language that is used. And of course, it was the 1950s and 60s. You went to church every Sunday.
Right.
That wasn't considered extraordinary in those days. Most Catholics went to church every Sunday. And we did. But my home, because it was mixed, in those days it was very common for Catholic families to pray, for example, the rosary, 15 minutes. They'd kneel down after supper, take the phone off the hook, and pray the rosary. We didn't have that kind of piety in the home because of my mother. But a lot of my friends, that was normal. You didn't phone it at dinner time because they were praying. They were on their knees, and they'd take the turns around the things. So I had, in some ways, a typical Catholic sort of upbringing of the time. And in some ways, it was a little different because it was mixed.
Was that looked at all? I'm just curious now, from the outside looking in the community. Was that looked at? Because I imagine, again, a Jew marries a non-Jew. Not as much now. It's not such a deal, especially in our community here. But growing up, that was a big deal when my parents would talk about it.
There were some, but there weren't that many. Particularly when I wanted to be a priest, people thought that was a little different, not to have a mother who was Catholic.
Was that held against you at all?
No, not held against me.
Did you have to sign a paper?
I didn't sign a paper. But she was so glad when it came to be a time of ordination. I was studying in Rome, and it turned out, because she was worried, like, what does a mother of a priest do? What is, kind of reception? What's kind of expected of me? But there was an ordination in Rome that I was able to be part of, so she could come and didn't have to do anything except pay a bill at a hotel, which she did happily. But, those kinds of things, I remember that, like, am I kind of supposed to do things? What do Catholic mothers do? And so that was obviated.
For those that, again, most of us have never, we know rabbis, we know priests, archbishops, we've never gone through the training, and I think it's kind of curious what that would be like, and I imagine there's a lot of similarities, because you have to be a people person. If you're not a people person, I don't imagine, no matter how much you study, regardless, you would be successful in your profession. Like, Rabbi Dan, first.
Well, I think that there are different ways to be rabbis. Not all rabbis serve congregations. Some serve on university campuses. Some serve in foundations. Some are hospital chaplains, prison chaplains. I guess you're a different type of people person in that environment. But if you want to be a congregational rabbi, it's so first of all, seminary for me studying was 6 years of graduate school. So 6 years of after getting a university degree. We do our first year in Israel, and then at the time that I was being ordained, they didn't ordain on the West Coast. They do now. So I did 3 years in Los Angeles, and then 2 years, I guess it was, in Cincinnati, which is where the seminary was at the time. I got an extra master's degree. So it's an academic program. I have a master's in education and a master's in Hebrew literature. But so you go through that program, but you do start to specialize. If you're interested in congregational work, then you'll intern in a congregation. You'll do, maybe a small congregation, again, out in some place where there's no rabbis and very few, or small Jewish community. But some are more into the academics of it, and they'll use that as a launching board into some kind of doctorate work or whatever. And you discover, I think, through the experience, what part of this, I don't want to call it work, but what part of this calling calls to you. I always enjoyed the work in congregations. I have many colleagues, classmates, that they found this very, very hard. It's hard on families. As my congregation knows, things happen at all days and times of the week. It doesn't matter if I'm supposed to have a day off or if I've got another thing going on. It's a crisis in your life, and it's a Tuesday for me. So, you've got to be open to that, and your family has to be supportive of doing that. And I've been blessed and fortunate to have an incredibly supportive spouse, my wife Sharon, who's here somewhere, and our children. Well, they're just kind of along for the ride. But I guess we'll hear about that in therapy later on.
And Archbishop, like, is it a similar? Is it as far as the education goes, or is it a different path?
Because I joined a religious community, the Bazillions, and our focus was education. So we did, I did an honors degree at Toronto and then a master's in Latin American studies. Not much theology or anything. Taught high school, and then I did 3 years of theology in Toronto at the Toronto School of Theology, and then 5 years in Rome of theology at the Jesuit university there called the Gregorian to get a doctorate in theology.
So is that just all day studying, all day, every day?
It was a lot of study, but certainly Rome had other.
Yeah.
it was a great place, but there's also, it's not just study, there's a whole lot of things which we call kind of formation, human formation, spiritual formation, and so on. So it's not purely academic. There are a lot of other things going on at the time, and because I was in a community, it's year round. You know, you get 2 weeks maybe with your family. So it's a kind of immersion, and by living with and by example and sharing. So, but I was glad that I was glad that I had another area of study besides theology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was given similar advice when I first started to explore becoming a rabbi. It was in my undergraduate years, and I went to the admissions officer of the seminary, and I said, I think I want to do this. What should I be a Jewish studies major in my undergrad? And they said, no, study something else that you're interested in, because you need to be able to talk to your congregation about something other than Judaism. And that was very good advice. And so I studied political science with an emphasis in constitutional law, American constitutional law, and I moved to Canada, so I can't really talk about any of these things.
Right, yeah, we're not that interested. You've developed a good stand-up routine, though, so it's all come together nicely. Is there anything that surprised you when you ordained, when you had your congregation, you as well, Archbishop? Was there? You're prepared for everything. You're prepared for people coming to you for counsel. You're prepared for. Was there something that surprised you at all that you weren't prepared for?
That's a good question.
God's listening.
One of the things I think that has surprised me, I don't know whether it wasn't not being prepared, was in some sense how, it's funny, but how good and devout so many people are. That was very, not exactly surprising, but I found that something that I hadn't anticipated maybe, because knowing just my own religious experience and those immediately around me, to see very deep faith in a wide number of people expressed in different ways, particularly in non-intellectual ways, but that was the real deal. That I don't think I hadn't expected. I had not expected it, but it was something that left an impression on me, perhaps because even before I went to the seminary, I went to Mexico to work with these student groups who used to go and do things, and was kind of overtaken because my own religious experience had been, well, it was modified by Protestantism and was fairly intellectual. And to see huge devotional life among swaths of people in Mexico left quite, that was an impression, and that's kind of stuck with me in a way. I remember being overwhelmed the first time, if anybody here has ever been to the shrine of Guadalupe. I was at the old shrine, the original, the one that was a Baroque church, as an 18-year-old kid, and seeing people with external manifestations of religious faith with which I was unfamiliar and in some ways not taken to, but able kind of finally to peel underneath and to see these are manifestations of faith. It's not just the way I conceive things. And so I guess maybe that became a religious surprise, maybe not just after ordination, but at a certain point in my life.
Before Rabbi Dan, Shrine of Guadalupe, just for those of us that don't know, what is that? Because it obviously is a symbolic spot. So what's the, I don't want to say what's the story, what's the history?
Well, I mean, you know, the story of Guadalupe is an appearance of Jesus' mother to an indigenous man in 1531, I think it was. And it's just a lovely story in which Mary says, you know, don't you know that I am your mother? There's no deals made. It's just a manifestation of the tenderness of Mary that the people have huge faith in. And it's very different from a kind of Anglo-Saxon Catholicism that I grew up with. And then I went on to study Latin American studies and so on, and returned often as a young person and actually taught in Mexico in a seminary once for early on in my life.
Did anything surprise you that you maybe, I don't want to, as the Archbishop said, maybe you weren't prepared for, that was not the right, but that you weren't prepared to see or experience maybe?
Yeah. I mean, there's been so many things. I think that I was really taken by the strength of community, the way that communities, this one and others that I've been a part of or served, pulled together at times, particularly when a family is in crisis within the congregation, within the community, that extended family that exists. I haven't seen that in too many other places outside of a synagogue or a house of worship. You know, it doesn't really exist in a children's school or on the soccer field or whatever it is. I mean, there's camaraderie and, you know, and there's certainly a bit of showing up for each other, but the way that congregations become this extended family, I know I was seeking that for myself, and I have just, throughout my rabbinate, been really, really awestruck to see how people show up for each other in communities of faith, in our community in particular. And that doesn't always mean showing up in this room, in synagogue. You know, I think the other thing, and I've said this to my congregation many times, is you'll probably spend 98% of your life outside of this room. And it's not about how often you show up in synagogue, but how often synagogue shows up in you, and you know, or church for that matter. Yeah. And to see it show up in people outside of this room, to see the expression of the values that are, you know, core to who I am, and I think fundamental to Judaism, practiced amongst people that wouldn't be outwardly identifiable as religious. They don't say keep a kosher home or observe the Sabbath in any sort of traditional way, but they are Jewish, and their Jewish values and how they see the world, how they see other people. And that has been, if I could say, it's been a saving grace in doing this kind of stuff.
You guys have been around. You've seen the, what would it be, the ebbs and flows of people's religious faith at times. As we're sitting here in 2023, where are we headed as far as the congregation goes? Like, are we seeing an upswing? Are we seeing a newfound faith? Are we seeing people turning away? I can only speak for myself and my circle of people. But when things happen that are happening in the world now, I know that brings us all together. I don't know another group of people in a community that's like that, because it encompasses us no matter where we are in the world, what our nationality is. It doesn't matter. You're Jewish, you're Jewish. And like what's happening now brings us all. Like, I'm sure you've seen more people coming to services. And I'm just curious how we see things moving forward, and Archbishop as well.
Well, it's certainly since the horrible attack on October 7th, where on October 6th, the Jewish people, not only in Israel but around the world, were pretty divided. Of the politics in Israel, on the question of how to deal with these two people that clearly have a care for and a love for and a desire to live in the land, if not to live in the land together, perhaps, but hopefully they do. And then Israel's society was divided, along pretty sharp political lines. And I gave many a sermon and had many a worry that we were pulling ourselves apart as a people, which we have done historically. The destruction of the first and the second temple were not from outside forces, but were because the Jewish people were fighting with each other. And then somebody took as an opportunity. And so you started to see echoes of that, and maybe we're seeing echoes of it now. But on October 7th, and all the horror that was of that day, the Jewish people immediately pulled together as one family, and certainly our congregation and synagogues and Jewish institutions across the city saw not only an uptick in the people showing up, but in the way that Judaism was showing up in their lives and Jewish identity. But that's in a crisis moment, and sadly, we go through these cycles of crisis and then not crisis. I would hate for it to be that only a crisis brings us together. I hope that the lasting lesson from this is that we are stronger together, and not only that, but as I've said publicly many times, and I want to say it here, the very first note, the very first communication I received after October 7th was from the Archbishop, reaching out to me and to our community. And as I've shared, that was a voice in the wilderness, because we didn't hear from a lot of people that we had allied with on many things. I didn't hear. And I think that what will hopefully help us navigate this very dangerous time, not just for Jews, but a very dangerous time, I think, for Western values, for the values of democracy, for the values of justice and equality and egalitarianism and inclusion and all of those things, will be people that live a faith that is based on love, a faith that is based on life, a faith that is based on tolerance and acceptance. And we share that. And I think we share that in this room. And as long as we can continue to find ways for that to flourish and to be supported, then I think we're going to be okay. But it is certainly under the gun, and we need to defend it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just thinking, Rabbi, that we used to talk a lot more about the Judeo-Christian tradition.
Yeah.
Or the Western tradition with the value associated with the values that you mentioned, and frankly, here in Canada, took for granted. Mm-hmm. And it's hard for us to readjust our understanding to see that there really are people who, it's not that they just don't understand or aren't there yet, but actually reject them.
Yes.
And that's become very clear in the last 2 months.
Yeah.
And I find that a very hard thing finally to get through, mm-hmm. and realize that it's not just a matter of time when everybody's going to kind of, in a sense, come along.
Right.
That there is such a thing as rejection of deep values that we hold, and I find that a disturbing truth.
Yes. Yeah.
Because it goes against so many of the kind of the hopes and dreams and maybe innate optimism that things are just going to get better because everybody's going to finally see what we hold, the values of tolerance, respect, of life, and it appears that that's not necessarily so, and it's been kind of shoved in our face in a very brutal and horrible way. Mm-hmm. That's one of the things that I find most upsetting. Well, you know, the facts, but what's behind it is something that causes one to pause and to see how will we actually deal with that a crumbling in some senses of something that has held at least the Western world together.
Mm-hmm. No, and I think that part of it is look, we're no longer teaching those values in our schools, and we're not teaching them in our homes. I mean, you talked about the example of families that you were growing up with that took the phone off the hook at dinner, right. and said a prayer before their meal and got down on a knee and prayed. And I think that part of it is our busy lives and our ever-connected thing, and having nothing to do with faith, but having everything to do with being just busy. Right. But some of it is also prioritization. And if you don't model that, if you don't practice that at home, what the chances that your children are going to then, take on those responsibilities or take on those values, I think become slimmer and slimmer. Yeah. And so, where I worry is look, you don't have to be religious. You don't have to belong to a church or a synagogue. But without believing in something, without having some structure, the way I usually describe spirituality and religion is that spirituality is religion on your terms, religion is spirituality on God's terms, which means you don't get to pick what you believe in or what you don't necessarily. I mean, you get to pick that, but you don't get to choose whether you value life or not. That's required if you're going to be part of this system. And I think that we have gotten rid of that sense that there are boundaries. Not everything that you can do should you do. Mm-hmm. And I think that is part of what has led to this decline in clarity about right and wrong, about justice and morality, and what is acceptable and what is not acceptable to do. And that's not with judgment to say that certain things, that one religion may find unacceptable and another one does. That's okay, but there's a place absolutely for tolerance, but there's also some boundaries. Mm-hmm. And I think that we've gotten rid of boundaries so much in our society that we're just falling off a cliff.
Let's open it up for questions. If anyone has any questions for the two distinguished gentlemen to my left.
And the priorities.
Yeah.
I'm looking.
And if you're more comfortable writing it on a card and then holding it up, and we'll
Sure.
close our eyes and know it's not you.
Yeah,
Okay.
everyone was very. It's funny how.
back.
Oh, it's funny how everyone's talkative in this sanctuary. Yeah. Oh, I got a card. Oh, thank you.
And go ahead.
That's Amanda.
All right. I'd like to ask you, what do you think Catholics can do to best contribute to combating anti-Semitism and showing
Good question.
solidarity?
Oh,
Thank you.
Her job is,
was that your card?
Oh, yeah.
Because that's the exact thing that's on this card as well.
but there's a Jewish parent.
The Archbishop's telling me he didn't plant that question. So first of all, thank you for even asking the question, because that's a start, and for being here. That's a start, too. We can't be strangers to each other. Part of the way that we combat anti-Semitism, anti-Catholic hate, anti-hate of any kind, is to know each other, right? And to not be strangers to each other. But in truth, Jews are not going to end anti-Semitism. No. We can't. It's only non-Jews that are going to stop anti-Semitism. And the way that you all, if I can say that, can be of most help to us in this struggle, and our community is feeling it right now. We feel in danger. Normally there's a police car outside of our synagogue. I don't know if they were there tonight. They've been pulling away a little bit because it's been 2 months already, and the city has other things they need to do. But our community is definitely feeling it in a way that they haven't perhaps for an entire lifetime. Is to speak up when you hear it, to not let it go by without note. We've discovered over these last 2 months that in all the list of the biases and the racism and the prejudices that universities and unions and schools and institutions are trying to educate against in their EDI training, anti-Semitism is not on the list. The oldest hatred in the world for people for what they believe and who they are is not on the list of the hatreds of people for who they are and what they believe. So making sure to raise that up and not be the Jew in the room that has to raise it. And when, of course, when you are in a conversation at a dinner party and somebody says something that is anti-Semitic in its sense of casting a whole people for the actions of maybe one government, is to call it out and to not be a party to it. It starts there.
Yeah. I was just talking to David and Jennifer at our table, and they have 3 kids in universities, but for the first time that they're kind of confronting, actually, one is, I think, at McGill and so on,
right.
And where we know things and that's something that, if we were in those positions, I have an academic thing that it's hard to imagine how that's being tolerated in our institutions of higher education. It's particularly distressing there to know and not.
I was analyzing that situation.
You want to just stand up so we can hear you?
I was analyzing this, and it came to my mind just now. When people don't know a person through their own eyes on a grassroots level, they can get paranoid and phobia. When you take the time to do that, I'll do that. I've got patience, and the laws go the process of the burden of proof. And I assumed, I thought it was this, but it's that. So if you can do that, or else if you can, someone that's very, very truthful, but that's time well spent
Thank you for that. Thank you.
I'm just stunned that recently when they passed the rule in BC that they're going to teach high school students about the Holocaust.
Right.
They've been teaching about World War II forever, and they've never mentioned, like, I find it appalling that it wasn't, like, again, I grew up learning about it, so it was, I assumed everybody knew about it. But let's be honest, if you're never taught anything through high school, and then someone in your 20s tells you, oh, the Holocaust happened and 6 million Jews were killed, he's going to go, please, if that happened, I would have learned about it in school.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's beyond belief that we're at that point still, and it's 2024. Any more cards or questions? While we wait, Archbishop, what do you do to relax when you're, put the collar down? What do you do? How do you relax?
Put the collar
Do you
down.
have a hobby? Do you have something you like to do?
I do love to travel, I must say. If I can do that, then I'm happy.
Oh,
There's another one.
Let's keep the questions going. So we asked, what are the social issues on which Jews and Catholics can most cooperate?
I think there's many. But
Well, I think one of them now is it would be our public stance, as you already mentioned, Amanda, against anti-Semitism, that we stand for respect for all people. That's a huge social issue, that kind of respect and tolerance is good. We also reverence life. We're not people, sometimes on the edges there might be disagreements, but life,
Yeah.
we see life as a good, that we do not think that carelessly taking life for any reason or to do it, I mean, that's something that has united us from in the commandments. We treasure families. We treasure the importance of family, that family is a primordial value and needs to be, and society has to work to sustain and build up and allow families to flourish rather than, with all the things that are necessary. That there seems to me we agree on just about.
I think we do. I mean, I think
on just about everything.
I mean, every time
there's little edges. It's on the edges
Just
that
on
there's.
but whenever the Pope issues some kind of teaching or some kind of decree, I'm like, I can make a sermon out of that. That's right in my lane. And I think.
So you're doing climate, I bet, this
we're
week.
doing
I hope.
climate,
Yeah.
right, yeah.
Okay.
So, no, and I think there's another place, our responsibility for our earth, and to be good caretakers of it. To be good citizens of the communities that we live in, the responsibility there, to recognize that none of this is a given, that we have a civic and social responsibility to be good stewards of our society, to be, to care for our education system, to care for our planet, of course. And I would just underline again what you said. I think the value of family and of life and wanting to create things and a society that supports that. So whether that is, livable wage and income and living so that families can actually live together and don't have to work multiple jobs and a parent is never home.
That's a really, the living wage is a big deal.
Yeah.
And we've kind of gotten away from that and now assume that you need two wages in order to raise a family.
I mean, I think, again, about what you just said about what it was like growing up and people taking the phone off and praying over a meal. And you can't do that if somebody has to work and the family's never together at dinner time. Or we have so obligated ourselves and programmed ourselves and calendared ourselves that families are never home to be together. And the value of a family being home, whether it's for the Sabbath dinner on a Friday night or just a Tuesday, is one that I think that we want to see a world and a society where that's not only possible, but where that is actually the objective, the goal.
Yeah.
I was involved in a Torah study this morning, and it talks about holy chutzpah. So I'm going to be a chutzpah victim.
Okay.
Hopefully some of your questions. What can Catholics do? Come on Sunday afternoon, 2 p.m. every Sunday. There is a rally to bring the hostages home.
Right.
The Archbishop. That's one.
Right, that comes down Georgia. I remember seeing it last week, right? It's.
And next week, it's on
Yeah.
Thursday night, we're going to light the Hanukkah at 5:30.
Yes,
So.
and you've done a lovely job, Rabbi, of promoting the bracelets to bring the hostages.
Yeah, I actually have the
What does it B? Does it say B?
No, it has the name of one of the
Oh, you
hostages
have.
on
Okay.
it. And that they were taking their name in Hebrew and in English. So.
And one more
Wow,
ribbon,
that's wonderful.
small, is to bring the hostages home.
That's certainly something that we could all do and believe in. Nobody wants the hostages kept. Everybody wants the hostages.
Well, somebody
home.
does.
No,
Well, they do, yeah.
I don't know. People keep ripping
In
the
this
posters.
room, I was thinking
People
that.
keep ripping the posters off the walls, man. Not
I know,
everybody
I've
wants
seen
them
that.
to come home.
Yeah.
You would think that everyone would want them to come home. That's why the world's upside down.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you stand up so we can hear you, Raquel?
Thank you for asking me the question. I think there are a few very concrete ways, if I may jump in which we can ask you to support our community. One of them is writing to political elected officials to thank them when they've come out, when you've noticed that they've come out in support of Israel and the Jewish community. And the flip side is write to them and say, warn to those who are not vocal about good versus evil. Ask them to support the Jewish community, to support Israel's right to exist within the safe borders. And if you add in your emails that you're Catholic, it really would make a difference, because we're busy writing letters and encouraging our community members to write letters, but we have skin in the game. So
Right.
if you take a moment to write a letter, it's a huge initiative. And I'll share the information with Rabbi Dan, but I'm on the board of one of the community organizations, and I have a list of politicians who've been supportive. And if all of you write one email, it's going to be huge. So, thank you.
That's very interesting because, so it would really help if we said, as a Catholic,
Yes.
because we're not used to doing that. We're used to not saying that or not doing it. But it would be helpful if we let them know.
Yeah, they expect to hear from us.
Right, as I said,
Right.
Yeah.
Jews are not going to end
Right.
anti-Semitism.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
It's only
No.
non-Jews that say we don't tolerate this.
Of course.
Oh,
I'm Jennifer, and I wanted to just say, give a testimonial that I grew up Catholic, and then I married my wonderful husband who's Jewish. And I can say that I've had an opportunity to be part of both religions and study both religions to some degree. And the commonality was very clear to me, the sense of family, the commitment to getting together for Sunday dinners, which I grew up with, and Friday night dinners, which I learned to grow up with. The sense of community of coming together, whether it's at temple or at a church hall. I grew up going to, bingo events and
Of course, bingo.
our kids taught people school after going through the process. And I can say there's more things that we share than that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm getting a little emotional.
No, thank you, Jennifer. We don't have bingo at our synagogue, but we do have poker and pastrami nights.
I see.
Second, Raquel's point, the list that Raquel has, she'll send to me. I'm Mary Margaret, by the way. And I will forward it to Archbishop Michael, and then it can be somehow distributed in the Catholic community. So that would be that.
Okay, thanks. Thanks,
Thank
MM.
you.
Question for you, Archbishop. In the Catholic community, we have made great strides against anti-Semitism since the Second World War, particularly after Vatican II, but many Catholics appear unaware of anything that appeared in the Nostra Aetate, the document that
No, they don't. Yeah.
appeared important in this direction, and other subsequent documents. How do we make more Catholics aware of magisterial, Vatican-level documents
Well-
that are strongly,
That's for everything. I think a lot of that is formation. I think in this particular question, people don't have to know Nostra Aetate. It's great if they do, and so on, the magisterial teaching. It really is face-to-face and confronting. Everybody can recognize anti-Semitism when they hear it, a Jewish slur, the comments that are around. That we should speak up about. The other, I think, is by study, adult formation and so on, that we try endlessly to do, and studying documents. There's a lot of documents from the Vatican or the Holy See and so on. That's
I
helpful.
thought we were the people of the book.
Oh, we have. Oh no, we got lots of documents. But I think that the immediate thing we can always do, because there is a lot of people who make what they regard as jokes or slurs and statements. One of the easiest things is the equation between what's happening, what Hamas is doing, and what the Israelis are doing when they sort of treat them as equals. I think that should be called easily into question. And that's, what's behind that. Why would someone think that a direct massacre as opposed to, at least, trying to save civilian lives, they're not the same thing. Mm-hmm. And yeah. But I'm with you. I think I love, if we could do more teaching and get more people in, I'd be with you on that. There's so many things.
Well,
but there's more we can do just even in our immediate circumstances right now.
I think that when we, from our pulpits, speak about the other communities in positive and in loving and in really enlightened ways. I was saying before, there have been many times that I've spoken about something that the Pope has said, or a doctrine that has been issued, or a teaching that has been offered, and I've shared that with our congregation. There's nothing, it's a wonderful thing, and not all wisdom comes from that room or only that book. Now I can say that as a Reformed rabbi, maybe others would say it differently, but there is, truth is truth, and there are good teachings everywhere, and certainly there are good teachings that are coming out of the church. And whenever I share that, I think that it opens up the eyes of my congregation and my community to see fellow travelers within the Catholic Church, and to the extent that can happen in your churches, to speak in that way about the Jewish community and to make that distinction, in particular. And the Jewish community is not always just about what's going on in Israel, but at this moment, that's very critically important. When we do that, when we bring our voices to issues that may not seem to be directly ours, I think that has a tremendous power.
Question, this is for Rabbi Dan, but feel free, Archbishop, if you want to hop in. Is Judaism and Zionism the same, or is there a difference?
So they are inseparable from each other. Yeah. Some will try, but every prayer that we have has some element of it about our origin story, our indigenous land, our birthplace in the land of Israel. So the return to the place that was the foundation of faith for the Jewish people, and we were talking about it before, we don't have the temple anymore. And so much of our synagogue right now is designed as an homage, as a reflection of what Jews did in practice in the land of Israel before the temple was destroyed. So you really can't separate the Zionism as the return to our indigenous land, the return to the land from which Abraham embarked upon his journey and where Judaism was discovered and flourished. You can't separate that from Jewish life. I think you can be Zionistic and not religious, and see a desire to return there as a social thing, as a cultural thing, as an identity thing. But within the context of Jewish religion and practice, no, I think that it's trying to separate oil and water. Well, I guess those separate automatically. It's the opposite of trying to separate oil and water. I'm a rabbi, not a scientist. You can't unscramble that egg.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
An event like we're having here tonight would have been unthinkable in 1950. Mm-hmm. Catholics and Jews sitting down, having a dinner, and having this dialogue together. It's a wonderful grace from God. The question is, there's been a tremendous amount of goodwill and harmonizing between Catholics, Protestants, Jews, and other non-Christians over the last 60 years. How can the religious communities, whatever they are, reach out to secularists and humanists who have discarded with religion and God? How can we bring harmony and a better accord between religious groups and non-religious
Archbishop?
Well, okay. As you know, I did, in the Vancouver Sun, I think it was last week, it mentioned that in Vancouver, it wasn't Greater Vancouver, but Vancouver itself, 56% of the people put down no religion on the census form. That means the majority of people, which means the majority of people with whom we interact with on a day-to-day basis. I don't think it's going to happen by sort of church groups inviting groups of non-church people or non-synagogue people to us. All of this it's the only way is going to be one-on-one. It's the people you interact with that you know are secular and, you know, present who you are, be a witness that these are things. I don't imagine that there's any kind of sort of academic way that this is going to come about. That I don't think so. I think it really is just the example of personal witness of one's integrity, one's life, you know, standing up for things that are true, having a strong sense of the moral law that you can share, you know, one-on-one with people, and that they see that your faith is not is enriching your humanity and not taking away from it. It's not diminishing you from them. It's not really separating you from their best of their aspirations as they knew them. But I don't think that there's any way that can be done other than, frankly, one-on-one or personally, small groups.
Yeah. I mean, I would add to that I think, you know, we talk about commandments and, you know, thou shalt not covet. But I think it's okay to covet another person's faith and their sense of centeredness, right, and their sense of sanctity in life. And the more that we can model that, the more that we can, for us, certainly not in a way that we're trying to proselytize, but to show the strength that being a family or a person of faith or religion has given you through difficult times. You know, when we go through something, whether it's an illness or it's a lifestyle challenge of some kind, and your friend's asking you, how did you get through it? You know, it's not just, well, I don't know, I made it, you know, kind of thing. But if your faith was the key to getting you through that, if your faith community was the key to helping you navigate that, if it's because people showed up with meals from your church, from your synagogue, or they prayed for you, or they drove you, name that, say that, because you're not going to get that at the yoga studio. You're not going to get that, you know, from even, you know, necessarily from the preschool community, although you might at times, but that goes away when your kids age out. But you don't age out of your religion. And so the more that we can identify what the source of our strength is, I think people might say, you know, I want that, or I need that.
That's a great phrase. Name it.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to say why.
Yeah.
You know, when people say, because I think in general we're rather reticent. Catholics are rather reticent. We have been because we too were, certainly here in the West Coast, we're a minority. And you know, just playing a little bit below the surface was kind of the better way.
Yeah.
And it seems to me we're probably now in a position where we should not do that, and that we have enough kind of gumption.
Okay, we've got a couple, go ahead, a couple minutes left.
Thank you very much for being here with us today, and it's been a wonderful gathering. This trying to go to the heart of the issue, what can we do, given the situation in Israel and Gaza, to bring about a workable solution? I know it's a difficult question, and that will be a thorn in our side because people who are marching on the street and supporting Palestine, what do we do? What is your solution? Which direction do we go? Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, honestly, I wish that I had the answer to that. I mean, I'll share a few things. One, I do think that Hamas is an impediment not only to Jews in Israel living in safety and security, it's an impediment to Palestinians in Gaza, and for that matter, in the West Bank, living in safety and security as well. I don't think that they serve either population or care about the safety and security of either population. I think they're using both. And so I do think that the elimination of Hamas is a critical piece for that. But it's an ideology. It's not just a group of people. So I don't know how you eliminate that ideology, as we were saying before. Some people just reject the values that we hold dear, like life, like the sanctity of human life. I do think that both in Israel and in Palestine and Gaza and in the territories, they need political leadership that sees coexistence as the only way through this, because they're going to have to share the land or they're going to kill each other on it, as we have seen. So that leadership does not exist in Israel right now under its current government. I've made no bones about the fact that my congregation, they know that I'm not in favor of this government. But there is a democratic process to replace that government. That's why millions of Israelis took to the streets for the better part of a year to call out to replace that government. You don't see that in Gaza because you know that you can't take to the streets in Gaza and call out Hamas. You won't be on the streets for very long or alive for very long. But there needs to be a change in leadership there also. I hope that, God willing, this will end, and it will end with all the hostages home. It will end with safety and security for Israelis to live within their recognized borders and within, a peaceful and sovereign nation. And I hope that we will not return to a wall that was necessary to prevent terror attacks, but became also a tool that was clearly used by the Israeli government to put some problems behind and not look at them. To not have to deal with them, because you can't do that with human beings also. But it's not only Israel's problem. It's not only their responsibility. They're not in Gaza anymore. So there needs to be political leadership on both sides that actually want the same thing, which is to live in peace with each other. And until there is, we have to deal with those that don't want to live in peace with each other. In Gaza, that's Hamas. I believe that Israelis do want to live in peace. And I think even on the most extreme right wing, if you were to give them the opportunity and the option to say you can live within your homes and your borders and not have to worry about rockets raining down on you, they would take that deal any day.
Mm-hmm. You use the word coexistence of the two. In the long term, do you ever see the possibility of the so-called two-state solution?
Well, I would hope so, because a one-state solution really does mean the eradication of Israel as a Jewish state. We are 0.2% of the population of the world. We're 1.5% to 2% of the population of North America, depending on how you count. And in Israel, we are about 65% of the population, if you were to include all of the Palestinians living in the West Bank or in the occupied territories, whatever you want to call it. And the way that the law of return works, it's unlike anything ever in the history of the world. Refugees going back to their homes are generally that generation that had lived there. But this is
we're
three,
third,
four
fourth
generations removed to have a claim. It's as though I could have a claim to go back to the shtetl in Odessa, from which my parents, or great-great-great-grandparents left. I don't have that claim. So that's not workable. I don't know how you make the physical space work. It may not all exist within the land of Israel. There's a whole lot of land around the land of Israel that is sparsely populated, that actually belonged to Palestinians, or Palestinians who were previously Jordanians or Egyptians before. And maybe that land should be returned to them as well. But yes, there needs to be a two-state solution, because a one-state solution is the end of Israel. And with that, quite possibly the end of the majority of the Jewish people.
Mm-hmm. So a one-state Israeli won't work. It just won't work.
No, a one-state solution won't work. The Palestinians live, they exist, and they live in that land. We have to deal with the reality on the ground. They want their own sovereignty and their own autonomy. Yes. And so you can't force them into a situation where they don't get it.
Mm-hmm. As you know, that's certainly the position of the Holy See, is ultimately a two-state solution.
Mm-hmm. We have a saying.
How you get there is a long.
Yes.
Is the long. That's the,
right.
the sort of the hope that Pope Francis always puts out. Is a two-state, but it's not clear. It's the passage there is not so clear, and nobody. I'm
going to tell you this. We say one thing. If the Palestinians put down their guns, there'd be peace. If Israel put down their guns, there'd be no Israel. And that's it. It's simple. Everyone wants to live in peace and just not worry about it and not have to deal with this stuff. But until you get people,
Willing to.
leadership, as Rabbi Dan said, if I would stand in the rallies with the Palestinians myself if their sign said "Free Palestine" from Hamas.
Yes.
I would stand with them right there every day. No problem. I get it. That's who's and it's, again, upside down world. I think.
We're pretty much.
Gentlemen,
We're there. Yeah.
are you sure? You're a businessman, you're a theologist, you got a couple of different degrees. Come on. Okay, just last question.
Last question.
I think maybe it's not quite an intense question. First of all, I'm a lifelong Catholic. This is my first time in a synagogue, and I really thank everyone, the Jewish community, for welcoming us here. But this is mostly a question for Rabbi Dan. It's about your Jewish perspective. I'm sure it's about on another crisis that we all experienced recently together. And I know as a Catholic, I think it's had an impact on Catholic parishes, and maybe it has on Jewish synagogues as well. And that was the recent experience with COVID. And religions were put in a very difficult situation. We kind of had to balance being good citizens and maybe restricting services, but it also meant that in a time of real need for many people, we couldn't attend. We were not allowed to attend. And what I've seen kind of as an aftermath of that some people, even lifelong Catholics, got out of the habit of attending, or felt that through no fault of our own, we weren't able to access our faith in person in a time of need. And so maybe some of these secular people aren't really secular. Maybe they're lapsed Catholics or lapsed Jews. And I wondered if the Jewish experience had also a Catholic experience in this, and is there a way to get those?
Yeah, I'll answer it quickly. Aware of the time. Thank you for the question. I'll answer it quickly. It's a good question. Thank you. So we saw a couple of things. One, we certainly have seen since COVID has ended that some in our community have not managed to make it back to the synagogue. We stream everything. There's a camera right there. And some, it's just a matter of convenience. It's easier to do synagogue in your pajamas on your sofa, I guess. I've never done it, but I'd love to try.
It's excellent.
It's excellent, right?
With coffee,
We
right?
actually surveyed the congregation because we stream everything. And we said, so when you watch services online, where are you watching? And people said, my living room, in bed. Do you stand when we stand? No. Do you sing along? No, not really. What are you wearing? Pajamas and sweatpants. But for some, it also created a way for them to connect, which was not available to them before because they were homebound, because as they've aged now, they attend services online, which they couldn't before. So that creativity, I think, has actually created more spiritual connection, more participation in our community. I think that when, at least from the Jewish perspective, we are accustomed to needing to be nimble. They destroyed our temple in the year 586 and the year 70. We had to reinvent Judaism because you couldn't do it the way it's described in the Old Testament in the Hebrew Bible. There was no temple to make sacrifices, and so we reinvented Judaism in what we call now Rabbinic Judaism. We replaced sacrifice with prayer. We went through that process again through COVID, and we found ways that you could be Jewish without attending the synagogue, and still, there were very, very painful moments where in our community, when somebody dies, you gather at their home, you gather at the bedside, you gather together, and we couldn't do that. You gather for celebrations like bar and bat mitzvahs, and we couldn't do that. And we've now gone through, for many of those families, now their second child is having a bar mitzvah, and the first one had it during COVID, and the second one is finally getting what they always wanted. But for those that only had one child during that, or for whom it was their last, they missed out on something. And they may never get that back. And so there's a real need to try to re-familiarize people with the importance and the beauty of coming together as community.
I'll just say one thing. I have a statistic for Catholics that because we do very strict mass attendance. And from 2019 to 20, we're down 16.7%. So there is a falling off. The second thing is that unlike perhaps even like Judaism, which is focused a lot on the proclamation of the word and the homily. Catholicism has a very strong sacramental sense, which demands in presence a participation that cannot be replaced by, in any sense of the word, by online. It's a very poor second best, third best, fourth best. That it's not at all equal. It's because of our understanding of, the visible realities of worship that have to be taken into account. And that's why I remember the Minister of Health when she would kind of say, well, isn't it just the same? And we say, well, perhaps in a religion which is focused on the word, and certainly Protestantism, that works. Catholicism and Orthodoxy and parts of Anglicanism don't.
Right.
That's why in presence is so much more, so absolutely important to our form of worship. And
yeah. I'm glad it was a moment, and I'm glad it's over.
Isn't it?
Rabbi Dan, Archbishop.
I've sort of forgotten it.
I was just saying thank you, gentlemen.
Great. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
You're a good guy. Okay. Hey, Ron. You see what your translation is, and keep you do, because I bet our wording is different.
That's okay.
Okay.
We wanted to end with giving you all a blessing together. It's the blessing that the Kohanim, that the priests would give to the people.
Right.
It's one that we share in our tradition. It comes out of the book of Leviticus. It's in Hebrew, it's known as Birkat HaKohanim, or the priestly blessing.
Right.
And so if we could ask you to stand for a moment.
It's the one that we read on New Year's Day. It's the
Yes.
it's the first reading.
So we thought Archbishop would do the Hebrew and I'll do the English.
Yeah, right.
You could have said I do the Latin. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I'll begin in the Hebrew. Do you want me to do all three, and then you'll do your version?
You do all three, and I'll do an abbreviated version because I don't have the text in front of me because I'm
Okay.
text-driven.
Right. Yevarecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. Ye'er Adonai panav elecha v'chunecha. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. Amen.
May the Lord bless you and keep you. May he guard your lives all the days of your life, and may you live in peace forever in his home.
Amen. Lech shalom, go in peace.
There you go.
And return in peace, please. Thank you all. Good
Thank
night.
you, Rabbi.
Good night.
Thank you so much for your hospitality. Thank you for making the place available. Made a big impression on lots of folks, as somebody said.
You're wonderful.
Somebody said.
Shane, you were great. Thank you.